Today, we're going to be learning the best card game on the planet, Disney Lorcana. All you need is a fistful of dice, some cards, and a friend who's willing to play with you.
What the hell, man?
I need you to pretend like you don't know how to play Lorcana.
But will the people like and subscribe?
You bet they will.
And here we are, at the Great Illuminary, refuge to the heroes of Lorcana and the relics and artifacts they find along the way. But now, we're here to learn about how to play the game Lorcana. So, I suppose a good point to start at is, how do you win? And the answer to that is, you need to be the first to get to 20 lore. We get lore from sending our characters on quests,
whilst doing everything in our power to stop our opponent's characters from questing as well.
Fitting within the animation theme of Disney, our characters are composed of ink, and your deck will be made up of 2 ink colours. There are 6 colours altogether in Lorcana. There is amber, amethyst, sapphire, steel, emerald, and lastly, ruby. But your deck can only be made up of 2. So how do you choose these 2? Each colour has its own specialities. There'll be a video coming soon on that, or perhaps on my channel already, depending on when you're listening to this. As I mentioned before, the aim of the game is to get to 20 lore by questing with your characters, so it seems sensible that the first thing we should do is take a look at what makes a character card. Meet Stitch, the new dog in the family. And although I could spend all day admiring the artwork on these cards, it's actually going to be my job today to describe all the different elements you see on it. In the top left corner of the card, you'll see the ink cost required to play this character. But how do we get hold of ink? Well, we actually turn the cards in our hand into ink that we can use to cast other cards in our hand. If you think that perhaps you don't quite need a card at that point in time, you can turn it into ink that you can then spend to cast characters, actions, locations, songs, you name it. If you see that the card has the yellow swirl around it, then that means it can be used as ink. And remember that when you ink a card, you must always show your opponent what it is that you're inking. You can only do this once per turn, but once you've inked something, it's on the table permanently, and you can use that ink every turn. Think of this as being similar to your mana pool in other games. Next, let's look at the stat line of the card, its strength and willpower. Strength represents the amount of damage a character can deal to another character, whilst its willpower is how much damage it can take before it is banished. Yes, that's right, banished, not killed. This is a Disney game, everyone, so let's keep it PG. On a dark strip that resides in the centre of the card, you'll see the character's classifications. These are important as many abilities on cards interact with classifications, such as when you play a hero, gain 1 lore, or perhaps all alien characters get +1 attack. Not that that exists yet, but you get my point. The last thing to take note of on the card is the amount of lore that the character quests for, which will ultimately win you the game. So how do we challenge and quest on characters? Well, that requires us to exert them. Exerting basically meaning turning them sideways. And it's important to remember that characters can't be exerted on the turn that they're played. This is known as the ink drying on the card. In other games, this is known as summoning sickness. Once a character is exerted, that's its one action taken for the turn. It can't do anything else. And so, when we exert our character card, we can choose to either quest, in which case we would just gain lore equal to the lore stated on the card, or we can challenge an opponent's character. This would inflict damage equal to our character's strength on the opponent's character's willpower. However, the opposing character will also deal damage back to your character equal to its strength. There is a catch though. When we turn characters sideways, exerting them, this leaves them vulnerable to attacks from other characters. Likewise, you can only challenge one of your opponent's characters if it's exerted at the time. There are other times that cards will be exerted during a game, but that's usually down to abilities and playing songs. If a card has this symbol on it, this represents the need to exert a character in order to pay for the ability on the card. Let's take a look at another example of a character card. And what would Stitch be without Lilo? Now you may notice something different on this card. In the top left, you'll see that there is no yellow swirl around the ink cost for this card. That means it can't be used as ink, and will have to stay in your hand until it's played. Usually though, cards that are uninkable tend to have better stats or quest for more lore, or have a very powerful ability. Now that we've covered character cards, let's move on to a different type of card. Actions. Much like character cards, actions have an ink cost as well, which can be found in the top left. You'll also see that they can be used for ink as well, much like every other card type in the game. Action cards are one-time use and disappear after they're played. Once they are played, the effect on the card resolves. In this case, Baboom lets you deal 2 damage to a chosen character or location. A very useful card for dealing with early game threats, and perhaps dealing the finishing blow to the big ones as well. Also, it's simply mandatory to shout Baboom when casting this card. Keeping on the theme of action cards, let's take a look at songs. Songs are also considered action cards, so you can play them as normal for the ink cost stated in the top left, with one slight difference. As this is Disney, you can use your characters to sing songs. As long as you have a character on the field that costs equal or greater to the value of the song card, then you can exert your character to sing that song without paying any ink. Friends on the Other Side here is a popular card in Amethyst that will allow you to draw 2 cards. Remember, having more cards in your hand gives you more options to ink,
and more options to help beat your opponent.
Next up is item cards. Items behave similarly to artifacts if you've played Magic the Gathering perhaps. They stay on the field once they're played, and their effects can be used as soon as they hit the field. Take the Sorcerer's Spellbook here for example. Its ability, Knowledge, states that we must exert the card and pay 1 ink in order to gain 1 lore. This would effectively put your opponent on a 20-turn clock if you hadn't quested at all yet during the game. And the last type of card is a location card. Locations are always in an exerted state, meaning that they can be challenged whenever. They have willpower just like character cards, but they also have a cost to move character cards into the location. Some locations have powerful effects that are applied to your characters when they are garrisoned within. Others, like McDuck Manor, just sit here and gain lore passively. Oh yeah, that's right, locations gain you lore as well. If a location has lore counters in the corner, then that's the amount of lore that you will gain at the start of each of your turns, as long as the location's still on the field of course. And that's all the different card types in Lorcana. Not too much to get your head around. Now let's move on to some of the key words that you'll see in character abilities. First up is Bodyguard. Here we have Simba, the protective cub, and protective he is. Bodyguard lets your character enter the play exerted already, and has a taunt effect, meaning that your opponents must challenge Simba first before they're able to challenge any of your other characters. And now we have the sneaky evasive characters. Evasive characters, like Ray here, can only be challenged by other characters with evasive. This can make them pretty tricky to deal with, and it's always handy to have a plan for your opponent's evasive characters. Next up is Challenger. Characters with a Challenger value get that value added to their strength when they're challenging, but lose it when they're defending. For our more hot-headed players, we have Reckless characters. Reckless characters can't quest, and they must attack each turn if able. Usually this means that they have higher stats than other cards that have the option not to attack. Take Gaston here. 4 attack for a 2-cost character is exceptionally high, but with the downside of having to attack every turn, no matter what your opponent has on the board, I think it's acceptable for him to have a little more attack. For the people who may develop separation anxiety with their cards, we have Resist. Resist prevents damage dealt to characters by the value indicated on the card. For example, Eeyore here has Resist 1, which means that if you were to use a Baboom card, as we talked about earlier, to deal 2 damage, you would only deal 1 damage instead. And for our next keyword, we have Rush. Rush characters are able to challenge the turn that they're played. Remember that usually you wouldn't be able to exert a character card on the turn it's played, but Rush is an exception. Now things get a little trickier as we move on to Shift. Shift allows us to play bigger characters sooner in the game, by playing them on top of smaller versions of the same character. Take Donald Duck here for example. He would usually cost 4 ink to play, but if you play him on top of a character called Donald Duck, he would only cost 3 using the Shift ability. Maybe that wasn't too complicated actually. And whilst I can't sing, Cinderella certainly can. She has a singer value of 3, which means she can sing songs that cost 3 or less, even though she herself only costs 1. Whenever you need to find a little help from your friends, a support character can't be that far away. Like Happy here for example. When he quests, he can use his support ability to grant his strength stat to another one of your characters. So for example, if you had 2 Happies on the field, and one quested, you could grant its attack to the other using support. This would make your other Happy a terrifying 6/5. And lastly, we have Ward. Characters with Ward can't be chosen as the target for abilities or actions. This makes them pretty untouchable outside of challenging, and can make them very tricky to deal with. Whew, and that's all the key words. Now I know that this is a little overwhelming at first, but fortunately, Ravensburger have got their own app for Lorcana that has a database full of cards that you can look through should you want to have a look at what different characters are capable of. The app also has a lore counter on it, which is a fantastic starting point for keeping track of yours and your opponent's lore during games. So now that we know how to ink, how to play cards, what those cards do, and how we can keep score, let's talk about how we would actually start a game. First and foremost, you need to decide who's going to go first. This is typically done by a high roll of 2d6s, but you can use any other method with even chance, such as flipping a coin. Next, you would draw your starting hand. The starting hand size in Lorcana is 7 cards. Oh, and I should also mention, there's no hand size limit in Lorcana. You can have as many cards as you like. Once we've had a good look at our starting 7 cards, we have the option to take what's known as a mulligan. This is where we get the choice to choose some of our cards to send back to the deck and replace them with new cards. To do this, simply pick out the cards that you don't want in your starting hand, put them face down on the table, and draw new ones equal to the amount that you've put down. Once you've done that, make sure that you shuffle the discarded cards back into your deck. So now you're pretty much ready to play. The only thing that's left to mention is that within Lorcana, there's not really an order of play so much. Once your turn begins, you ready all your characters and all of your ink, follow that by drawing a card, and then after that, you pretty much have free reign. You can play an action, or you could challenge first, or you could quest first. You can do anything in any order you like. Finally, a reminder that the game will end when a player reaches 20 lore. Now then, a reason I grabbed a friend earlier. I'm going to showcase a couple of turns with him, using the starter decks from set 5, Shimmering Skies. Hopefully this gives you a good enough idea of how to play the game, so you can go ahead and get started yourself. So, here we have my home table, and across from me is the friend I stole earlier. We give a little fist bump. It's always nice to have good sportsmanship in games. And then we roll 2d6 to see who goes first. As you can see, I managed to roll a 7, whilst my friend here manages to roll a 9. Beginner's luck. That means he'll choose to go first. You should always really choose to go first in Lorcana. There's no real benefit to going second in the game currently. However, each of your turns in Lorcana starts with you drawing a card, but if you're going first, you don't draw a card on your first turn, whereas the second player does. So now that we've drawn our 7 cards, let's take a look at the mulligan. Here we have the 7 cards that we drew. Ideally, what you're looking for in your hand is a good curve, and by that I mean things that you can play on turn 1, 2, 3, 4. You also want some inkable cards in your hand, otherwise you won't be able to play anything. So here I decide to get rid of 3 cards and keep my good curve cards, the 1, 2, 3, 4. And we are blessed today as we get treated to a turn 5 play off the draw. Don't forget that when you're done with your mulligan, shuffle the cards that you discarded into your deck before starting to play. Now let's get on to the gameplay. My friend here chooses to ink a Royal Guard. He then exerts his 1 ink to play Rudy. Next is my turn. I draw for my turn, I ink a Daisy Duck, and then exert it to play my Taffeta Mutton Fudge. My friend then inks a Rudy and plays a Sleepy. Because Sleepy is a bodyguard, he can be played exerted, meaning that he's protecting Rudy from being challenged. This allows Rudy to quest for 1 lore with no threat of being challenged. Next is my turn. I ink a Taffeta Mutton Fudge and play a Turbo. Turbo is a fantastic card that has Rush, allowing me to challenge with him on the turn he's played. So I challenge with Turbo and Taffeta into Sleepy. It's not quite enough to take out Sleepy, but we can deal with that later. My friend inks a Scar and plays a Shenzi, a card with 2 strength and 3 willpower that's also evasive. He then proceeds to quest with his Sleepy and Rudy for a total of 2 lore. It's my turn again. I get to draw, ink a Rancis Fluggerbutter, and play an Archimedes. Archimedes is also evasive, but quests for 2 lore. Now Taffeta can take out Sleepy and Turbo can take out Rudy. And the best bit is, none of my characters were banished as a result. My friend draws for his turn, exerts 3 ink to play another Shenzi. 2 evasive characters might become a real problem for me. He then inks a Hei and quests with Shenzi before ending his turn. Remember, since Shenzi is evasive, my Turbo and Taffeta can't attack her. I ink a Taffeta Mutton Fudge and then exert 4 ink to play an action card, Glimmer vs. Glimmer. This allows me to banish one of my cards in order to banish one of my opponents. It's safe to say that little Taffeta has done her job, so I will choose to banish her to banish my friend's Shenzi. I then proceed to quest with my 2 characters for 3 lore in total. And so on so forth. You get the idea. You keep going until one of you can get to 20 lore. Hopefully this video gave you some insight in how to play Lorcana, and if you did get something from it, make sure you drop a like on the video and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more Lorcana content. The starter decks you saw in the video a moment ago can be purchased from your local game store most likely, and if they don't have any in stock, you better ask them to get some in stock. As I mentioned earlier, the next video that I'm planning to make in this series will go into a bit more depth on the specialities of each of the ink colours. Following that, I want to release a video that explains a bit more about the competitive side of Lorcana and introduces deck building as well. So keep an eye out for them. But until then, I will see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.
Why has he never used the door?